Humanity had always dreamed of stars. They built ships that could cross the darkness and founded colonies on distant worlds. For a time, life was full of hope. Cities grew under alien skies, children played on new soil, and people believed that the galaxy was wide enough for everyone. They thought peace would last forever. But peace was only an illusion. The first attack came without warning. On a quiet colony called Ardent Prime, families were celebrating the Harvest Festival. Lights glowed in the streets, music filled the air, and children laughed as fireworks rose into the sky. Then shadows fell. Alien warships appeared above the clouds, massive and silent. No message, no warning, no mercy. The sky itself turned to fire. The Karzul, a species older and stronger than humanity, descended with weapons no one had ever seen. Entire districts burned in seconds. Their soldiers marched through streets, killing anyone who moved. Men, women, and children, no one was spared. A mother ran with her daughter in her arms, but a single flash of energy reduced them both to ash. A boy hiding in the cellar could hear the screams of his neighbors before silence took them all. By the next morning, the colony was nothing but ruins, smoke rising into the void. News spread across the human colonies, but before leaders could react, another world fell, and then another. The Karzul moved like a storm, swift and merciless. Each report was the same. Cities burned, civilians slaughtered, no survivors. It was not war. It was extermination. A silent genocide spreading through the stars. On Earth, governments argued in their chambers. Some called for negotiation. Others demanded a counterattack. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Humanity was too weak. Their fleets were scattered, their weapons outdated. Against the power of the Karzul, they were like children with sticks standing against a hurricane. The survivors told terrible stories. On Karthos Station, soldiers tried to defend the escape ships, but the aliens cut them down as if they were nothing. Refugees described how Karzul soldiers took pleasure in the slaughter, dragging humans from hiding places and burning them alive. On Vega's moon, a man whispered through a broken radio before his voice faded forever. "We are not fighting an enemy. We are facing death itself." Panic spread. Families crowded into ships, fleeing from one world to another. But the Karzul hunted them even in the void. Convoys of refugees were ambushed, their ships torn apart, their screams lost in the silence of space. Humanity, once proud of its courage, was now reduced to prey. Yet even in the darkest night, sparks of defiance remained. In the ruins of Ardent Prime, a small group of survivors hid beneath the wreckage. Their leader, a scarred miner named Jalen, swore to the broken men and women around him, "We are not animals. We are not prey. They can burn our homes, but they will never burn our will." His voice was weak, but his words carried a fire that refused to die. Across the scattered colonies, whispers spread. People spoke of revenge, of a time when humanity would rise again. But these whispers were only dreams for now. The truth was clear. Humanity was broken. Entire generations were erased. Entire worlds were gone. The galaxy did not weep for them. Other races watched in silence, unwilling to stand against the Karzul. Humanity was alone. On a cold night in the mountains of Earth, a council of military commanders met in secret. Maps of burning colonies glowed on their screens. Silence filled the room as they stared at the destruction. Finally, an old general spoke. His voice was heavy, almost broken. "We cannot win this war, but if we cannot win, then we must change the war itself." No one understood his meaning then, but those words would become the seed of something far darker. For now, humanity was on its knees. They buried their dead in shallow graves. They fled like shadows through ruined cities. They looked to the skies with fear, knowing that at any moment fire could fall again. And yet, behind those fearful eyes, something dangerous began to grow. Hatred. The genocide was not only killing their bodies, it was shaping their hearts. Every scream, every grave, every burned world was writing a new truth into the soul of mankind. They would never forget. They would never forgive. And in the silence of the ashes, one promise echoed again and again: we will never be victims again. The ashes of genocide still hung in the air when whispers of a secret plan began to move through humanity's broken ranks. Worlds were gone, families were erased, and yet the survivors refused to vanish. On ruined space stations and burned-out colonies, people spoke of hidden laboratories, of scientists working in silence, far from the gaze of the Karzul. They called it the Project. It began in the underground bunkers of Earth. The council of commanders, men and women who had lost everything, met in dark rooms where no light of hope reached. They knew humanity's fleets could not match the Karzul. They knew negotiations were pointless, but they also knew one terrible truth. If humanity was to survive, it could no longer remain the same. Dr. Mira Kalin was one of the first to speak. She was once a respected geneticist, a woman who studied life with compassion. Now her eyes were hollow, her family slaughtered on Vega's moon. She stood before the council with trembling hands but a steady voice. The enemy calls us weak. They call us prey. If we cannot match their strength, then we must become something greater. We must become something they fear. At first, the generals hesitated. Her words sounded like madness. But as reports of new massacres arrived, their doubts weakened. Finally, the old general who once said, "We must change the war itself," leaned forward. His eyes were cold as stone. "Do what must be done," he said. So the work began. Deep under the ice of Europa, in secret chambers hidden from scanners, humanity's scientists pushed aside laws, ethics, and fear. They spliced human DNA with alien samples, taken from battlefield corpses. They fused flesh with machines, replacing bones with metal and nerves with wires. Artificial intelligence was bound to human minds, making thoughts faster, instincts sharper. The goal was not to create soldiers. The goal was to create monsters. Volunteers came forward, though many would not return. Most of them were broken people, fathers who had lost children, mothers who had seen their families burned alive, soldiers who had survived when everyone else died. They carried pain in their hearts, and they wanted only one thing: vengeance. One of them was Arik Vaynar, a soldier from the ruins of Karthos Station. He had been found half dead, carrying the bodies of his wife and son in his arms. His voice was gone, his soul hollow. When the doctors asked if he wished to volunteer, he only nodded. The first experiments were brutal. Many died screaming on the tables as their bodies rejected the changes. But for those who survived, the results were terrifying. Their strength was beyond human. Their senses reached into places no normal mind could endure. They could see in darkness, hear whispers across a battlefield, crush steel with their hands. But the cost was heavy. Their humanity was slipping away, burned out by rage and by the machines that now lived inside their veins. In the quiet corridors of the secret facility, the scientists watched them with unease. Some of the new soldiers wept uncontrollably in the night. Others laughed with voices that no longer sounded human. A few stared at their own reflections, as if trying to remember who they once were. Still, the council pressed forward. Every day the Karzul killed more innocents. Every day the fire of hatred grew. If monsters were the price of survival, then monsters would be born. The final test came with Arik. He was strapped to the table, his body covered in scars, his mind filled with loss. The machines hummed, the lights burned, and the surgeons worked with trembling hands. Hours passed. Then silence. Suddenly his eyes snapped open. They glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. A sound tore from his throat. Not a human scream, not an animal cry, but something deeper, something primal. The walls shook. The scientists stepped back in terror. Dr. Mira whispered, her voice full of fear and awe. "He has survived." The old general stared at the transformed soldier through the glass. His lips curved into a grim line. "No," he said, "he has been reborn." Outside, the galaxy still believed humanity was weak, dying, broken. But in the frozen tunnels beneath Europa, a new weapon was rising. A weapon that looked human, but was no longer bound by human limits. The victims of genocide were gone. In their place, the first monster of humanity had opened his eyes, and the war was about to change forever. The first monster was not the last. After Arik's transformation, the secret facility beneath Europa no longer questioned the project. The council demanded more subjects, more soldiers, more monsters. Transport ships brought broken survivors. From across the colonies, men, women, even young soldiers barely passed their training. Each carried scars of genocide. Each carried hatred burning inside their hearts. They all knew the same truth. Nothing human could stand against the Karzul. To win, they had to become something else. The laboratories became a place of screams. Flesh tore, metal fused with bone, and blood stained the white walls. Many died during the process, their bodies rejecting the changes, but the Council did not stop. Every failure was buried in silence. Every success became another weapon for humanity. Awoke was the first to awaken, but not the only one. Soon there were 12. They were stronger than steel, faster than thought, and their senses stretched into places no normal human could understand. They could see heat patterns through walls, hear the rhythm of a heartbeat across the room, smell the faintest trace of blood in the air. They were living nightmares, but with power came fear. When the scientists looked at them, they no longer saw people. They saw shadows wearing human faces, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Their voices carried an echo, as if two beings spoke at once, the human and the machine. Some monsters cried silently at night, trying to remember their families. Others grew cold, empty of emotion, as if their humanity had been burned out in the fire of war. Awoke was different. He did not cry. He did not laugh. He trained in silence, his body moving like a weapon guided by instinct. Every time he struck the training targets, they shattered into pieces. The soldiers who watched him whispered in fear, unsure if they were looking at a savior or a demon. The Council did not care. To them, the monsters were humanity's only hope. Finally, the time came for their first mission. The Karzul fleet had invaded another human colony, a mining world called Ferron. Civilians were trapped in the mines, hunted like animals. The human navy could not reach them in time, but the monsters could. A black ship carried the 12 across the stars. In the silent cargo hold, they waited without fear, their glowing eyes fixed on the floor. A normal soldier would have prayed, but the monsters sat in silence. When the doors opened above Ferron, they jumped into the night like falling comets, landing in fire and steel. The aliens laughed at first. To them, these were just humans with armor, nothing more. But laughter died quickly. Awoke was the first to strike. He moved faster than sight, ripping through the enemy lines. His hands crushed weapons, his voice roared with a sound that froze even the Karzul. The other monsters followed, each one tearing into alien ranks with savage precision. One monster threw an alien tank into the sky. Another split open a squad of soldiers with his bare hands. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse. The Karzul screamed, their arrogance shattered. For the first time, they tasted fear. The trapped civilians watched from the mines. They saw shadows moving like storms, ripping apart their enemies. To them, it was both salvation and terror. When the battle ended, Ferron was free, but the ground was covered in blood. Not only alien blood, some monsters had killed in rage, striking down anyone who stood too close, even fellow humans. When the survivors tried to thank their rescuers, the monsters did not speak. Their glowing eyes met the civilians' gaze for only a moment before turning away. The people whispered among themselves. Were these truly humans, or had something darker been unleashed? Back on Europa, the Council celebrated. The monsters had proven their power. They had destroyed an entire alien force without losing a single soldier. To the Council, it was a victory. To the rest of humanity, it was a warning. Dr. Mira Kalin stood apart from the cheering generals. She had seen the footage of Ferron. She had heard the way Awoke roared, the way the monsters ripped apart flesh as if they enjoyed it. Her heart was heavy. We have created weapons, she thought. But can weapons still call themselves human? The galaxy, however, did not care about such questions. Word spread quickly. For the first time since the genocide began, the Karzul had been stopped. Their commanders sent desperate messages back to their empire. One voice trembled as he spoke into the void. These are not humans anymore. They are something else. And so the galaxy learned to fear humanity, not because of its armies, not because of its ships, but because in the face of extinction, humanity had chosen to become monsters. The galaxy had changed. The Karzul, once untouchable and feared, had felt something they had never known before, terror. Their armies, that once crushed worlds without effort, now whispered about the monsters that fought for humanity. And as fear spread through alien ranks, humanity's hunger for vengeance grew stronger. The Council no longer spoke of defense. They no longer spoke of survival. Now, they spoke of punishment. Every world they burned, the old general said, we will burn in return. Every scream they gave us, we will give back tenfold. His voice carried the weight of every grave, every destroyed colony. The others did not argue. The monsters became their blade of vengeance. No longer did they wait for the Karzul to attack. Instead, human ships carried the monsters straight into enemy space. When alien worlds saw shadows falling from the sky, they knew death had come for them. On the battlefield, the monsters were unstoppable. Arik led them without words, his presence like a storm. Entire fortresses fell to his fury. One strike of his fists shattered walls that had stood for centuries. When he roared, soldiers dropped their weapons in terror before they were cut down. The other monsters followed his lead. They moved like predators across alien cities. They did not fight wars. They hunted. Karzul families ran through the streets the same way humans once had, clutching their children as fire rained from above. No one was spared. Some humans cheered these victories. They called the monsters heroes, saviors, who had turned fear back against the enemy. But others looked at the burning alien worlds and felt unease. The line between justice and cruelty was fading. Dr. Mira Kalin watched the war reports in silence. She had once believed the monsters were humanity's last chance to survive. Now she feared they were becoming something far worse. On one recording, she saw a monster dragging alien soldiers from their hiding places and laughing as he tore them apart. In another, a child's cry echoed just before the feed cut to static. Mira pressed her hands to her face. We wanted to protect our children, she thought. Now we are slaughtering theirs. But the council ignored her. The war had become their obsession. For every human world lost, a dozen alien worlds were burned. For every human scream, 10 alien screams echoed across the stars. Humanity was no longer weak, no longer prey. Humanity had become the predator. Arik himself felt the weight of this transformation. In quiet moments, when the battlefield was silent and his hands still dripped with blood, he looked into broken mirrors and saw something that was not a man. His reflection had glowing eyes, scars of metal across his skin, and a face that no longer carried warmth. He asked himself, am I still human, or am I only vengeance wearing flesh? The civilians who once prayed for the monster's arrival now avoided their gaze. On one colony, after the monsters freed a group of captives, a little girl stepped forward to thank them, but when she looked into Arik's glowing eyes, she froze in fear. She clung to her mother's arm and whispered, "He looks like them." The words struck Arik harder than any weapon ever had. Still, the war continued. The monsters had become the tip of every attack. Entire fleets moved only to deliver them into the heart of enemy territory. Each mission was bloodier than the last. They killed not only soldiers, but anyone who carried the Karzul name. The message was clear. The age of human victims is over. Now begins the age of human monsters. The Karzul begged for peace. Their envoys sent desperate messages, offering to retreat, offering to pay for what they had done. But the council did not listen. To them, peace was betrayal to the dead. The genocide had written a wound too deep for mercy. On the battlefield of Vera Prime, as the alien capital city burned, Arik stood on the ruins. The sky glowed red with fire, the streets ran with blood, and the screams of the Karzul filled the night. Around him, the other monsters tore through what remained of resistance. He lifted his head to the sky. The stars shone above, cold and distant. In their light, he felt both victory and emptiness. The humans had won this battle. They would win many more. But a voice inside him whispered, "What will be left of us when the war is over?" For now humanity had chosen its path. Blood for blood, fire for fire, and every victory brought them further away from what they once were. The galaxy, watching in silence, began to fear not the Karzul but humanity itself. The war was no longer survival. It had become conquest. Everywhere the monsters went, fire followed. Alien cities fell in hours, entire populations erased. The Karzul, once cruel and merciless, now hid in fear of the very humans they had once hunted. Their leaders sent desperate pleas for mercy, offering peace, tribute, even surrender. But humanity did not listen. The council only had one answer: destruction. In their eyes, peace was weakness. Peace was betrayal. The dead of Ardent Prime, Vega's moon, and Karthos Station still cried out for vengeance, and the monsters delivered it. But not all of humanity agreed. Whispers spread across the colonies. People asked whether they had become worse than the enemy. Mothers who had lost children to the Karzul now watched alien children burn and felt no victory, only sorrow. Soldiers who once cheered the monsters now looked at them with unease. The line between justice and cruelty had vanished, and no one knew if it could ever be found again. Arik felt the weight more than anyone. His body was strong, his senses sharp, but his soul was cracked. Each battle left him emptier. Each scream echoed in his mind long after the fight was done. He had avenged his wife, his son, his people 100 times over, yet the emptiness never left. When he looked at the monsters under his command, he saw the same hollow eyes. One night after the burning of Karzul's great city of Drenvak, Arik stood among the ruins. The flames reached into the sky, painting the night red. A child's toy lay in the ashes, melted and broken. He picked it up, his massive hand trembling. The glow in his eyes dimmed for a moment. Behind him, Dr. Mira Kalin approached. She had been sent by the council to observe the monsters, but her heart had grown heavy with doubt. She looked at Arik holding the toy, and her voice was soft. "Tell me, Arik, is this victory?" Arik did not answer. His silence was enough. Across the stars, humanity's allies began to fear them. Smaller civilizations that once offered refuge to human refugees now closed their doors. They had seen the recordings of burning alien worlds, of monsters slaughtering without mercy. To them, humanity was no longer the victim. Humanity had become the nightmare. On Earth, protests began in the streets. Survivors of the genocide shouted for vengeance, but others carried banners that read, "Stop the monsters. Save our soul." Families argued in their homes, torn between grief and guilt. The war that had once united humanity now began to divide it. The turning point came when the monsters landed on Selith, a neutral world that had not taken part in the genocide. Rumors had spread that the Karzul were hiding there. Without hesitation, the council sent the monsters to cleanse it. When the smoke cleared, Selith was gone. Its cities burned, its people erased. But there had been no Karzul there, only innocence. The galaxy watched in horror. Humanity had killed a world that had never raised a weapon against them. The council called it a mistake, a tragedy of war. But others called it the truth, that the monsters no longer cared who they killed, only that they killed. It was then that Arik began to doubt his own existence. He returned to Europa, to the mirrors that haunted him. He stared at his reflection for hours, his eyes glowing faintly, his scars twisting his once human face. In a voice barely more than a whisper, he asked himself, "Am I still human? Or am I the very monster I swore to destroy?" The next day, while training, a child survivor of the genocide visited the facility. She was small, fragile, her parents long gone. The council wanted her to see the monsters, to believe they were humanity's protectors. She walked into the training hall where Arik stood in silence. Her eyes, innocent yet scarred by loss, looked up at him. For a long time she said nothing. Then, with a voice that trembled but did not break, she asked, "Will you protect us? Or destroy us too?" The question pierced deeper than any blade. Arik, the strongest of the monsters, the leader of vengeance, could not find an answer. His lips moved, but no words came. The silence in that hall was heavier than any scream. In that moment, Arik knew the truth. Humanity had reached a point where they could no longer turn back. They had gained power, but they had lost their reflection. The war was not about victims and monsters anymore. It was about what humanity was becoming, and the greatest enemy left was not the Karzul. It was themselves. The war had reached its end. The Karzul Empire, once feared across the galaxy, was broken. Their fleets were scattered, their cities turned to ash, their leaders hunted down one by one. The monsters had carried humanity to victory, and no enemy could stand against them. For the first time in history, humanity was safe, but the price of that safety was written in blood. Across alien worlds, smoke still rose from burning ruins. Fields were filled with bodies, not only of soldiers but of families, children, and innocents who had been caught in humanity's wrath. Entire planets were silent, their people erased forever. The galaxy no longer whispered of the Karzul. Now it whispered of humans. In the council chamber on Earth, the generals declared triumph. Their voices thundered with pride. "We are no longer prey," they said. "The galaxy will never dare touch us again." To them, it was the greatest victory in human history, but not everyone saw it that way. Dr. Mira Kalin sat in the shadows, her eyes hollow. She had been there from the beginning, when humanity was broken and desperate. She had built the science that created the monsters, believing it was the only way to survive. But now, watching the celebration, she felt only guilt. "We are alive," she whispered to herself, "but what part of us is left alive?" The monsters themselves felt the same weight. They had been made for war, shaped by pain and rage. Now, with no enemy left to fight, they were left with only silence, and silence was worse than battle. Awoke walked through the streets of Earth, his towering figure drawing stares. Children hid behind their mothers. Soldiers who once cheered his name now lowered their eyes in unease. He passed a mirror in a broken shop window and saw his reflection. Glowing eyes, scarred metal skin, a face twisted by war. For the first time, he truly saw what he had become. He whispered to the empty street, "We were victims once. Now we are the monsters." The other monsters felt the same. Some roamed abandoned battlefields, unable to leave behind the ghosts of war. Others locked themselves away, refusing to be seen by human eyes. They had won the war, but they had lost their place in the world they had saved. One night the council summoned Awoke and his warriors. The general spoke of a new age. Humanity was strong now, feared by all. They wanted the monsters to lead new armies, to spread human power further across the stars. But Awoke stood silent. His glowing eyes scanned the room, and when he finally spoke, his voice was steady, heavy with truth. "We were made to end a war. That war is over. If we keep fighting, we will not be protectors. We will be destroyers." The council tried to argue, but the monsters turned and left. Their footsteps echoed like thunder down the halls, leaving the generals in silence. Humanity had its victory, but the weapons of that victory were walking away. Days later, the monsters gathered at the edge of known space. A black ship waited for them, its engines humming softly. The stars stretched out before them, endless and cold. They had no destination, no home, no future. But they knew they could not remain among the people they had saved. Awoke stood at the front, looking back one last time. In his heart, he remembered his wife, his son, and the countless graves of humanity. He remembered why the monsters had been born. He also remembered the question of the little girl, "Will you protect us or destroy us too?" With a final breath, he answered, "Not to her but to himself. We protected them. Now we must protect them from what we have become." The ship rose into the void. The monsters vanished into the darkness, leaving humanity behind. On Earth, people celebrated victory, but in quiet corners, others wept. They knew the truth, that survival had cost them their innocence. That to live they had turned to shadows, that the monsters were not gone. They were simply waiting in the dark, reminders of what humanity had done, and so history was written. Humanity had been victims. Humanity had suffered genocide. But in answering that horror, they had chosen the darkest path. They had become something more powerful than prey, but also more terrifying than their enemy, from victims to monsters, and the galaxy would never forget.